Okay, so now we're going to talk about the white blood cell component of blood fluids. So, if we remember, white blood cells are what mediate the immune response in our body to either damage or antigens, or the damage that antigens cause. So, for the scope of this lecture and this application, the most important thing to note about white blood cells is their role in inflammation. So, inflammation is defined as a complex of tissue changes that happen in response to substances that are released by injured tissues or by antigen binding. So, inflammation will cause the vasodilation of local blood vessels, and by vasodilating, it also increases their capillary permeability. And so, this results in fluid and proteins leaking from the fluid in the blood in the capillary to the interstitial space. And this is what can cause swelling and also the redness that is associated with inflammation. So, something that's interesting to note is that the reason why, for example, if you get a cut on your finger and it becomes infected, you only get swelling at the site of the infection and not throughout your entire body, is because the inflammation is actually localized via the same clotting factors that allow your blood to coagulate. But those clotting factors get introduced into the interstitial space from the blood. As you can see in the image at the bottom, the increased permeability because of the vasodilation will allow the white blood cells and clotting factors and red blood cells to go through diapedesis and exit the blood vessel and enter the interstitial space. And so those clotting factors will go into the interstitial space, will become activated the same way that happens in blood coagulation, which we'll talk about later. And then you can clot the interstitial space to keep your entire body from swelling. It localizes that swelling just to wherever the issue is. And an interesting application of inflammation is actually a really common issue of chronic inflammation. It's becoming even more of an issue as we progress. And so I have linked an article. This is the title here. The whole citation is at the beginning of this presentation. If you would like to read it, it's really interesting, and it kind of connects a lot of the different organ systems in what happens when you have chronic inflammation, maybe how you get it, how it results, and what it can cause to go wrong in your body. But I summarized everything in that paper into the image that's on the left. And so the idea is that if you have an increase in inflammation, there's two different ways that that can eventually cause an increase in blood pressure or hypertension. And one is that inflammation actually stimulates the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. Specifically, it can overstimulate aldosterone, and that will cause there to be a sodium and water reuptake and it'll be increased. That way, you increase the blood volume, and of course, increasing the blood volume can increase blood pressure. The other way is that increased inflammation can actually cause endothelial dysfunction, which we saw earlier where we had the increased permeability of the endothelium. So when you have increased endothelial dysfunction, it can actually cause a decrease in your NO production. And NO is a vasodilator, so if you decrease its production, you're going to decrease the ability to vasodilate, which will cause constriction of the vessels, which increases resistance, which is also another reason why you can have increased blood pressure. And if it's increased blood pressure consistently over an amount of time, that can cause hypertension. And the hypothesis of this paper, or that was presented in this paper, is that the increased blood pressure hypertension can actually alter protein structure enough to where the body no longer recognizes it as self, and it mounts even more of an immune response against those proteins, which increases inflammation. So it becomes this positive feedback loop, and it kind of spirals out of control. So that's all I have for white blood cells. In the next video, we'll talk about platelets.